Howdy folks. Today I'm going to try to make a video. I've been trying to make this video for a couple of weeks now, and I just finally got all my parts and pieces and components in to where I can make this video. We're going to be talking about inserts and arrow setups today. I just got my arrows done for 2025's season. This is the arrow I'm going to be running all year. This is the Victory Xtorsion 250 spine with a 3 fletch with a really hard helical on it. I'm going to be shooting fixed blade broadheads this year for elk season. So I wanted to run a little bit of a helical on there. And that arrow does not have it, but these arrows do. These are the UFO lighted nocks that I'm running on there on the front of them. And on the business end of it is this little fella right here. That is the Northern Evo 125 grain 2-blade fixed blade head. And I am very impressed with it. So far I have shot and practiced with, I set one up with the broadhead and one up with a field point. They fly really good. The only discrepancy in it is when I can't hold as tight as I need to on the target. That's really the only time that I have any complaint on it, and I can't blame that on the broadhead. That's all on the guy behind the trigger of the release. So I've got a few here. I'm gonna set a couple more up for practice arrows. I've got a couple dozen of these set up, or that I'm going to set up. So I'm just gonna set up a few for practice so I can work on shooting out at some longer distances and getting dialed in for elk season, and then for later for whitetail season as well. So to begin with, my first process is I bought the components I'm using are these guys right here. This one's got a broadhead on it already, but this is the Ethics Archery system. It is a 85 to 115 grain aluminum post, and then with a 25 grain aluminum outsert collar. Really beefs the front end of that arrow up. These arrows, this arrow right here, as it sits, is 660 grains. It's the heaviest arrow I've ever shot. I wasn't trying to go heavy, and I know there'll probably be comments on here about, you know, watching too much Ranch Fairy. I've never actually watched any of that. I don't form my opinion of my arrows and my arrow setup off of anybody else. I set up what I set up because usually it's just because it's the components I buy and how I cut my arrows and the length I have them and the spine of my arrows, and then it all just kind of adds up, and whatever weight it is the weight it is. I don't have a specific weight that I shoot for. If it's light, that's fine. I'll shoot it to a certain extent. I won't shoot anything that's under probably 440 grains, but I lean more towards a heavy arrow. My sweet spot would probably be somewhere in the 500 to 530 bracket. These arrows come out a little bit heavier, but I'm not really complaining about that, just because of elk season coming up, and I want to have an arrow that I know can go through an elk no matter what angle I'm shooting at, or a whitetail in the thick cover around here. I want to be able to put one through a shoulder blade of a whitetail if I have to. I don't set my arrows up for making perfect shots. That's something I've never believed in. I've never agreed with. I set my arrows up for the times when I mess up and I make an imperfect shot, and I would a whole lot rather be able to have an arrow that would break bone and drive through and hit and tear up as much stuff as it possibly can while it's going through, as opposed to having a light arrow that will not get the penetration and wound an animal. That's the worst feeling in the world. I've done it before when I was younger, shooting a light arrow that was about 320, and I had a deer at 18, 19 yards, pulled the shot, hit her in the shoulder blade, and never found that animal. Shooting a fixed blade head, never found her. It didn't penetrate the shoulder. I was shooting 40 pounds, and the arrow was just too light, and never found her. And that was the worst feeling that I've ever had. on an animal, because I knew that it was more than likely my fault I rushed the shot. And from then on, I've always been a proponent of having arrows that can get through bone, especially on deer. So I am setting up these arrows tonight, and just gonna put a few of them together here real quick. I'm probably only gonna do one on camera just for the sake of time. I don't want this to be a 40-minute video of me just sitting here putting components in and gluing stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a little bit of sandpaper. These Victory Xtorsions, they're a little, the collars from Ethics, I've ordered the .272 collars, and they were way too tight. I couldn't get those to fit at all. So I had to go back and order the .276 diameter ones. And they fit, but you got to sand down the end of the arrow a little bit, which is no big deal. But just sand that down, then I'm going to slide the color on there, make sure I get a good fit and it slips on there easy. Then, and this is something a lot of guys don't like to do. A lot of guys don't use hot melt for whatever reason. I've noticed lately on the carbon arrows, I've heard it said that it breaks down the integrity of the carbon. I've used hot melt for years in these glue, or in these arrows, and never really had an issue with it. So it works for me, and it really helps when it comes to index and broadheads, because it doesn't set up immediately, and you can sit there and twist that broadhead until it lines up perfectly with your veins. So I'm just gonna take my little torch and melt my glue here a little bit. Just take that. I probably put a little too much on there, but not. Right there. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward process. Just stick that in there, then make sure your blades are lined up with whatever feather you're using as your indicator vein or indicator feather when you put your knock on your D-loop. And that's pretty well it, guys. It's just quick. I know this is probably the cringiest video you've ever watched, but just wanted to try to stick my feet in here and figure this thing out. And I'm trying to get this channel up and going. This was a quick and easy video that I wanted to put on here and just show you a couple little tips and tricks that work for me. We're going to be adding more to this channel. Hope y'all have been enjoying it so far. And we're going to go ahead and sign off here. Y'all have a good evening. God bless.